I remember the first moment I realized I was nothing more than the ugly duckling of my family. It wasn't a dramatic scene, no slamming doors or shouted words, just a quiet, pointed look exchanged between my mother and sister when I tried on a dress for a cousin's birthday. I was 11. My sister, Arabella, 3 years older, laughed into her palm and whispered something to Mom. And Mom didn't correct her, she just nodded. That was the beginning of it all, I think, of me shrinking into corners, wearing plain colors, and burying my spark beneath safety. Arabella was always the radiant one, the one who took the stage in every room. Blonde hair that caught the sun, eyes like cold sapphires. I was the backdrop to her spotlight. My name is Elise Monroe, and I was the afterthought. Until recently. Now I know how to own a room. But the road there, it was hell. Arabella was getting married, and I had been invited. Begrudgingly, I suspected. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not after the incident. I got the wedding invite in a white envelope that smelled like peonies. Inside, an RSVP card, the date, the location, a sprawling estate in Oxfordshire, and a note written in Arabella's elegant cursive. No +1 for you. Wouldn't want to cause confusion. No +1. That single line undid me for a full minute. See, Arabella knew. She knew I was finally dating someone. And not just anyone. But fine, if she wanted a show, I'd give her one. 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a call. It was Leo. Elise, he said, voice velvet and thunder all at once. I got your measurements from Anna. The dress is nearly done. You really didn't have to do this. Oh, but I did. I bit my lips, staring at the half-empty teacup in front of me. She's going to think I did it just to upstage her. And that would be wrong? Because? I laughed, surprised by the sound. Leo always had that effect. He wasn't just a designer. He was the lead designer. The elusive icon behind a dozen runway revolutions. And, for some reason, he had taken a liking to me. The dress arrived in a black garment bag with gold embroidery. When I unzipped it, I forgot to breathe. Midnight blue silk, cut in a way that seemed to float on its own. It was daring, subtle, architectural. And it was mine. I didn't tell my parents. I knew how it would go. Just wear something beige, Mom would say. Let Arabella have her moment. Arabella always had her moment. But not this time. I arrived at the estate alone. The gravel crunched beneath my low heels, the only concession I made to comfort. Heads turned as I walked past. Not immediately, but like ripples on a pond, one by one. It was a strange feeling, being seen. I found my seat at the back of the aisle, tucked behind an ornamental hedge, of course. Elise, a voice said. I turned. It was my cousin Miranda. Her eyes widened. You look, wow, where did you get that dress? A friend designed it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, and that felt like a small win. The ceremony was saccharine, all pink roses and softly weeping guests. Arabella cried delicately, dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She was beautiful, of course she was. But I wasn't watching her. I was watching the man 3 rows ahead, sleek black hair, a scar across his chin, and a subtle twitch in his jaw. He looked familiar. Too familiar. I shook the thought. At the reception, the seating chart placed me next to the coat closet. Miranda gave me a sympathetic look as she floated past to the main table. I sat alone, swirling the wine in my glass. Until I wasn't alone. Mind if I join you? The man from the ceremony stood over me, glass in hand. Be my guest, I said. He sat. You're Elise, aren't you? I paused. Do I know you? You might. I'm Daniel. He extended his hand. Arabella's ex. Oh. Now the scar made sense. She told me you were forgettable, he said with a shrug, but I never believed her. The wine burned going down. Well, I said, she's an expert on forgetting things. He smiled. It wasn't cruel, just amused. She looks happy, I offered, because I didn't know what else to say. She looked happy when we got engaged, too. His words lingered longer than they should have. The music started. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone came for me. And right on cue, Arabella. Elise, she said, sugary and sharp. I didn't see you come in. What a unique dress. Thank you. It reminds me of something I saw in a window in Prague. Second-hand shop. I smiled. You'd know better than me. Her eyes narrowed, just for a beat. No plus one? Nope, just me. How brave. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for it to snap. So who made your dress? She asked finally, trying to regain control. And there it was. The moment I had waited for. I leaned in, just a touch. Leo Varelli. She blinked. Once. Twice. That Leo Varelli? The one and only. Quote. Arabella's lips parted. Then she laughed, loudly. Oh, Elise, you're such a joker. Am I? I reached for my clutch, pulled out my phone, and showed her the photo. Leo and I, at his Paris studio, arms slung around each other. She went pale. You? He offered, I said, pocketing the phone. Said it was about time someone wore his work who had a story worth telling. Arabella didn't respond. But her hand twitched on her champagne flute. Across the room, Daniel raised his glass to me. And that was when the power flickered. Just for a second. Then came the scream. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The scream came from the bridal suite. Everything froze. For a breathless second, the music stuttered, and the clinking of glasses ceased. Then a loud crash shattered the tension, and heels began clicking rapidly across the marble floor. Guests murmured, confused and curious, rising from their seats. I didn't move. Arabella turned, her eyes wide. Stay here, she snapped and lifted her gown as she rushed toward the hallway. As if I would follow her orders. I stood and walked slowly after the crowd, careful not to look too eager. There was something in that scream, not just fear, but panic laced with humiliation. A door slammed upstairs. Voices, footsteps, then silence. I reached the bottom of the staircase and saw a group gathered in a tight circle. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then Arabella's voice cut through. No one goes in there! A few guests turned to leave, awkwardly glancing at one another. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, What the hell is going on? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. An hour later, the reception had resumed in an uneasy haze. Arabella returned, her makeup untouched, her smile tightly fastened like a choker. False alarm, she announced. Just a wardrobe issue. But I saw the tremor in her hand. The DJ hesitated, then restarted the music. People danced, laughed louder than necessary. But the spell had broken. The fairy tale atmosphere had cracked, and everyone knew it. Daniel found me again by the terrace, the scent of cut roses and night air brushing against us. Want to know what happened? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. You found out? He nodded. The groom's sister walked in on Arabella, and the best man. I nearly choked on my drink. They were intimate? Half undressed. Locked door. She had a meltdown when caught. My stomach twisted. Not in disgust, but something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Arabella had always been the perfect one, the untouchable one. And now, on Hermo's wedding day, she had detonated her own bomb. I should have felt sympathy. But all I could think about was the way she used to whisper cruel things into my hairbrushes, read my diary aloud to her friends, and tell me I'd never be loved unless I learned to starve like she did. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Daniel looked out toward the hills. Because you looked like you needed to win something tonight. Did I? Yes, he said, meeting my eyes. And you have. It was after midnight when the first drunk aunt asked me where I bought the dress, then another. And another. I watched Arabella across the room, her eye twitch betraying her frozen smile. The groom, Callum, was nowhere to be seen. By 2 a.m., the whispers were louder than the music. She cheated? Who? With the best man? Chris Watrain, and on the wedding day. Did you see her sister's dress? She looks like royalty. I slipped out to the gardens. The night air was cool. a breeze winding through the sculpted hedges and marble statues. I sat on a wrought iron bench, heart thudding for reasons I couldn't explain. The sound of footsteps made me glance up. It was Callum. His tie was gone, his shirt partially unbuttoned. He looked like someone who'd just watched his house burn down. "Elise." I nodded. "Didn't expect to see you." He ran a hand through his hair. "Didn't expect to be here." He sat beside me, leaving a full foot of space. "Is it true?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, "Yes." I exhaled slowly. "Everyone's talking." "Let them." I looked at him, really looked. Callum had always been a little too perfect, like a porcelain figurine placed on a shelf. But now, broken and real, he was human. "Did you love her?" He looked at the sky. "I thought I did." "And now?" He didn't respond, just let the silence stretch. "You looked beautiful tonight," he said finally. I turned sharply. "Don't." "It's true. You're married." He laughed, short and bitter. "Am I?" The door creaked open again behind us. Arabella. Her silhouette was backlit, like a ghost coming to haunt its own story. "There you are," she said to Callum, ignoring me completely. "We need to talk." He stood slowly. "About what? The part where you ruined everything?" Quote. Her lips parted in shock. "You don't get to judge me," she snapped. "No," I said quietly, rising to stand beside him. "But I do." Her eyes found mine, a flash of fury igniting. "Don't you dare make this about you. You made it about me the moment you lied, the moment you mocked me for years, the moment you laughed at my dreams and thought your cruelty was a sport." She stalked forward. "You're pathetic, wearing Leo Varelli like some badge of worth. You think a designer dress changes who you are?" "No," I said, voice low, "but it made you look twice." She hesitated. "You wanted the world to think I was nothing, and for years I believed you, but now—" I looked at Callum, then back at her. "Now I know better." She clenched her fists. "Go ahead," I said. "Throw your tantrum, burn what's left, but know this, I'm done being your shadow." She stormed away without another word, her train catching on the garden stones. Callum stayed beside me. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, I realized something. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Because somewhere deep inside, the ugly duckling had spread her wings, and she was learning how to fly. But the wedding wasn't over yet, and neither was Arabella. She had one more card to play, and I wasn't ready for what came next. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight had already poured across the guest room floor. The floral curtains Arabella had probably hand-picked herself fluttered with the early breeze, but the illusion of calm didn't touch my bones. My phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. 10 missed calls, 5 texts, all from Mom. "Sykes, where are you?" "Clome, don't make a scene." "Clome embarrassed your sister. Come down right now." "Clome Bella is in tears." I sat up slowly, pressing a hand against my temple. A headache pulsed behind my eyes, not from the wine, from the weight. The weight of always being blamed. I glanced at the dress hanging by the door. Midnight blue silk, now a symbol of mutiny. Leo had sent a message with it. "Try sass, be who you are." No permission required. I slipped into a plain navy dress instead and tied my hair back. No makeup, no glamour. They didn't deserve it today. Downstairs, the dining room buzzed with post-wedding chatter. Guests gathered in clusters, sipping espresso and nibbling on buttery croissants like nothing had shattered the night before. Arabella sat at the head of the table, porcelain smile pasted back in place, her eyes locked on mine the moment I entered. "Look who finally woke up," she said sweetly. Every head turned. I walked toward the coffee pot, ignoring the daggers she shot with her lashes. "Mother wanted to speak to you," she added, louder. "Did she?" I murmured, pouring coffee with a steady hand. Mom appeared beside me like a summoned ghost. "Elise," she hissed under her breath, "what were you thinking?" "About what, exactly?" That dress, that conversation, the garden. I turned to face her. You mean the moment your golden child proved she's human? Lower your voice. Why? Mom looked around, flustered. This is her wedding weekend. It's not about you. No, I said coldly, stepping back. It never is. I sat at a small corner table by the window, away from the fuss. Daniel slid into the seat across from me moments later with 2 painkillers and a water bottle. You look like someone preparing for war. She wants to pretend last night never happened. Let her pretend. You don't have to join the fantasy. I looked at him. He looked back. And something unspoken passed between us. Recognition. We were the collateral damage of Arabella's perfection. But no longer. At noon, the photographer arrived for day after brunch portraits. Arabella changed into a flowy white sundress with flower embroidery and posed beneath the arched trellis, holding Callum's arm like he was a prop. His expression was unreadable. I stood beside Miranda and another cousin. They're doing a good job pretending, Miranda whispered. Oscar-worthy, I said. But the charade cracked when Callum stepped away mid-photo. Just walked off. Arabella's smile dropped so fast it could have bruised the floor. Where are you going? She called after him. He didn't answer. Whispers began again. Second waves always sting worse. Arabella shot me a death glare across the lawn. Then she moved. Stormed toward me like a queen descending to address the traitor. I hope you're happy, she said low and tight. This is what you wanted, right? To ruin my day. Arabella, I began. You couldn't stand one weekend not being the center of attention. So you slither in wearing that dress, flirting with my ex, and planting poison in Callum's head. I didn't say a word to Callum, I said. You don't need to. You exist like a wrecking ball. I felt the fury rising, but I held it. I would not give her the satisfaction. You wrecked this on your own, I said softly, and now you're looking for someone to blame. She trembled. Do you know what people are saying? They think I cheated. They think I'm trash. I tilted my head. Well, that part you managed without my help. She slapped me, right across the face. The gasp that followed rippled through the entire lawn. Even the photographer froze. I blinked slowly, my cheeks stinging. Then I smiled. Thank you. Now everyone sees who you are. Arabella stood frozen, her hand still mid-air. Callum stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. We're done, he said simply. This marriage, this farce, I'm annulling it. Arabella turned to him, frantic. No, you can't. We just got married. He looked at me. She slept with Julian, the best man. Someone gasped again. Arabella backed away like she'd been physically struck. You told her? She shrieked at him. No, he said. I told myself. The moment I realized it was always going to be you first, and everyone else broken behind you. She turned back to me, and this time there was no fury. Just fear. The crowd watched in horrified silence. She spun around and fled, veil fluttering behind her like the end of a white flag. And then the silence broke, with applause. Not thunderous, but undeniable. I turned slowly. It was Aunt Claudia, and Uncle James, and Miranda, and a dozen others. Clapping. I didn't cry. I simply bowed. Not out of arrogance, but survival. I had endured a lifetime in the shadows. And now, at last, I stood fully in the light. Arabella might have fled, but she wasn't done. Not yet. Because 2 days later, I got the letter. And it changed Simtwarazias father everything. The envelope arrived at my flat on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered, cream paper, thick as cardstock, with gold calligraphy that curled around my name like a challenge. Elise Monroe. No return address, no postage. I knew it was from her. I waited nearly an hour before opening it, staring at it like it might explode. Then, with a sigh, I peeled it open, carefully, like unwrapping a trap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Kamexabala, you may think you've won. You always did want a spotlight you never earned, but you don't understand what you've stepped into. This isn't over. I will make sure you regret humiliating me. Two-sider. You don't know what I know, and you don't know what you've risked. Asterisk, asterisk, Arabella. I read it again, then again. Not a single apology, not a hint of reflection, just venom. And something else beneath it, something darker. What did she mean? You don't know what you've risked? I grabbed my phone and called Daniel. She sent a letter, I said, skipping pleasantries. Of course she did, he muttered. What does it say? I read it to him. She sounds unstable. She's unstable, but this feels different. There was a pause. She said, you don't know what you've stepped into? Yes. Daniel exhaled. Elise, do you know who funded the wedding? I blinked. Their parents? No, Arabella did. Out of a trust fund she wasn't supposed to touch. How do you know that? Because I saw the documents. Callum showed them to me months ago. It was meant for her startup. She liquidated it to throw the wedding of the century. I let that sink in. So now she's broke? Not just broke, breached contract with 2 investors. She signed agreements that her trust funds were secure and untouched. My jaw dropped. So if they find out, she could face legal action, severe. And she thinks ruined her life? She needs someone to blame, and you're the easiest target. I stood from the couch and began pacing. Daniel, what if she tries something? Then we'll be ready. But I didn't feel ready, not even close. By that evening, the wedding scandal had reached the online tabloids. Arabella's name trended on a local celebrity gossip site under the headline, Oxford heiress allegedly cheats on groom at wedding, marriage annulled within days. A grainy photo of her in the garden, her hand raised, my face mid-slap. They didn't blur it, of course not. I stared at the comments, bile rising. She hit her own sister? Classy. Tom, the dress the sister wore, though? That was fire. Tom's Arabella Monroe has always been entitled. It was only a matter of time. Times, someone find the sister and get her on a podcast. Leo texted me one sentence. You've gone viral, darling. And somehow, that scared me more than anything. By the weekend, 3 fashion blogs had tracked me down. One offered an interview. Another wanted to feature the dress. And a third asked if I was available to consult on a rebranding campaign. I should have been thrilled. But Arabella's letter lived in my veins like poison. Mom called Sunday night. What did you do to her? She demanded. Nothing. She did it all herself. Elise, your sister is devastated. Good. Maybe devastation will teach her what kindness couldn't. She said, you leaked the story. I laughed bitterly. She had a public meltdown at a wedding with 200 guests. She leaked it all by herself. You've always been jealous of her. That one hit. No, I whispered. I've always wanted to be safe from her. There's a difference. I hung up before she could reply. At midnight, someone knocked on my door. I froze. Then, cautiously, I looked through the peephole. A man, mid-30s, clean cut, business casual. Ms. Monroe, he called gently. Yes? I'm from Landar Legal Services. You've been served. He handed me a thick envelope, nodded once, and disappeared into the stairwell. I stood in the hall, trembling. The documents were from Arabella. She was suing me for defamation. My vision blurred as I scanned the language. Tice public character damage, malicious rumor spreading, emotional distress, financial loss due to slander, and the kicker. Requested damages, $350,000. I sank to the floor. It was real. Arabella wasn't just angry. She wanted to destroy me. And she was ready to lie to make it happen. I called Leo. She's suing me. Good. Excuse me? Now you have proof she started the war. Now we fight back. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. Leo's voice softened. You are not alone. We'll bring everything she buried to the surface. Let her drown in the truth. I curled on the couch, legal documents spread like battlefield maps around me. Daniel texted, "I know a lawyer. I'll set up a meeting. Don't panic." But I already was. Because Arabella had money, influence, and a mean streak longer than a Roman road. And I only had my truth. But truth, I would soon learn, is more dangerous than anything Arabella could conjure. Because she made one mistake. She filed everything under her Keimer real name. And that name was tied to a secret no one was supposed to find. The lawyer Daniel found for me was named Isla Harrington. Early 30s, sharp as a scalpel, and had the kind of voice that made people stop mid-sentence and listen. I met her at a cafe tucked behind a bookstore in Kensington. And within 5 minutes of hearing my story, she closed her notebook and said, "We're going to bury her." "She has more money than I do," I reminded her. "But not more receipts. And definitely not more skeletons." We spent hours going through every detail. The slap, the guests, the garden. I gave Isla names of witnesses, texts from Arabella, screenshots from the fashion blog threads. Then Daniel joined us halfway through, armed with a flash drive. "What's that?" Isla asked. "Proof," he said, "from Callum." He plugged the drive into Isla's laptop. I watched her face tighten as a folder opened, titled Times Prenup, plus Trust Documents, plus Correspondence. Callum had saved everything. Arabella had used trust funds marked for secure ventures to pay for the wedding. She'd forged her father's digital signature to release the second half of the funds. Forged. Isla leaned back in her chair. "Forget defending, we might want to countersue." I blinked. "For what?" "Malicious prosecution, emotional distress, and financial retaliation. You got served for defamation? Let's raise her a fraud charge." I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt like I was holding a grenade. Back at my flat that night, I opened the windows, lit a single candle, and stared at the city below. I used to believe there was a moral limit to revenge. A point where you stop, take the high road. But Arabella hadn't just crossed a line. She bulldozed it and then blamed me for the ruins. My inbox buzzed. Another message from the fashion blog. "Hi Elise, *. We're running a follow-up on the dress. Can you confirm if it was Leo Varelli's fall unreleased line? Our readers are obsessed." I typed back. "Sorchas, it was a one of one. Leo made it for me. Thank you. Would you consider doing an interview for our podcast? Our producer is willing to fly to London." I didn't respond. Instead, I called Leo. "Do you regret making that dress for me?" He chuckled. "Darling, it was my pleasure." She thinks I humiliated her. She humiliated herself. You just had better lighting. I smiled faintly. I got sued. I know. Everyone knows. I've already been asked for comment. What did you say? He paused. I said the only thing a designer can say when one of his muses becomes iconic overnight. I said Elise Munro didn't wear the dress. The dress wore her. *. I laughed. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The next morning, Isla emailed the draft response to the defamation suit. It was brutal. Line-by-line deconstruction of Arabella's claims, complete with attachments. Screenshots of praise from fashion commentators, testimonials from guests who witnessed the slap, and a letter from Callum stating he, not I, had informed Daniel of Arabella's infidelity. Then came the countersuit paperwork. I read it slowly. My name listed first, Arabella's second. Accusations of targeted legal harassment, reputation damage, and fraud. I signed it. A week passed. Arabella's legal team responded with demands to settle quietly. Isla smirked. They want out. Do we let them? Only if she apologizes. Publicly. I didn't think Arabella would. She didn't. So we filed the countersuit. And then, everything unraveled. Someone from the original investment firm her trust fund had partnered with caught wind of the story. They initiated their own audit. Within days, it was confirmed. Arabella had violated contractual terms. And then came the press. Thamel fallen it girl faces lawsuit over forged signatures. Thamel bridal scandal deepens. Trust fund ties to fraud investigation. Thamel Forzen Vilo socialite Arabella Monroe sued by sister after public meltdown. Thamel Vilo Forzen Vilo Soi factual. Thamel Forzen Vilo Soi Thamel Vilo Thamel Shoi. Instead, I opened my Instagram. New followers, 23,000 and climbing. Brands DMing, podcast invites, modeling inquiries, speaking opportunities. I looked in the mirror. Same face, same body, but not the same woman. One morning, 2 months later, a letter arrived. From Arabella. Typed. Signed in ink. Butsane Elise. Asterix. Bossed everything. They froze my accounts. The trust is gone. The investors are threatening prison. Tourising line snate snee. Tourising line snate 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 snakes. Tourising line snate snates. Tourising line snakes. 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 But I hope someday you'll understand. Tourising line snakes. Being perfect is a prison too. Tourising line snakes snates. Tourising line snakes. 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 Now snates. Tourising line snakes. Then I folded it and placed it in a box. Not out of nostalgia, but as a record. Because there would come a day when someone else tried to dim my light again, and I'd remember what it took to protect it, what it cost, and why I would never go back. But the final chapter hadn't been written. Because just when I thought Arabella was gone from my life for good, a knock came at my door. And when I opened it, I saw her. Standing in the rain. No makeup. No entourage. Just a suitcase. And a single sentence. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at her. Then stepped aside. And let the past walk in again. Not as a sister, but as a warning. Because some ghosts don't come to haunt. They come to beg. Arabella stood in my doorway like a postcard from another life, one I never asked to receive. The rain plastered her hair to her face, mascara streaking despite the no-makeup lie. Her suitcase was soaked halfway up the sides, the wheels caked in city grime. She didn't look like the woman who'd starred in tabloids and bridal spreads. She looked like someone unraveling. I stepped back. She didn't wait for permission, just dragged her suitcase inside like it might collapse if she let go. I closed the door and stood there, uncertain. She set the bag near the wall and took in the flat. Spartan, warm, undeniably mine. "You have plants," she muttered. "People do." She didn't laugh. We stood in silence for a long time, the ticking of the hallway clock loud as thunder. "I won't stay long," she finally said. "Just until I figure out where to go." "How did you even know where I live?" She flinched. "Mom." "Of course." "She said you'd probably slam the door." I considered it. Another silence, this one colder. Arabella reached into her jacket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. She handed it to me without speaking. Inside were 3 checks. All bounced. I looked at her. "This is what you gave your landlord?" She nodded. "They locked me out. I had nowhere else." "You could have gone to Mom." She looked down. "I did. She said I needed to learn humility." That stunned me more than the visit itself. "She always took your side." Arabella gave a tired smile. "Turns out sides change when you have no money." I folded the checks and placed them on the table. "You can sleep on the couch, 2 weeks." She looked up, eyes wide. "Really?" "After that, you're on your own." She nodded quickly. "Yes." Thank you, Elise." I walked into the kitchen and made tea. We didn't talk that night. The next morning, I woke to the smell of burnt toast. Arabella stood in the kitchen, hair tied up, wearing one of my oversized sweatshirts. She looked smaller. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I wanted to say thanks." I took the toast anyway. We sat across from each other like two nations negotiating peace after a 100-year war. "What happened to Julian?" I asked. Her face twisted. "He ghosted me 2 days after the annulment, said he couldn't be seen with someone radioactive." I didn't reply. Everyone vanished. Sponsors, friends. Even the photographer refused to release the rest of the pictures. They were always hired applause. She glanced at me. "You weren't." I raised a brow. "You think that's a compliment?" "It's an apology." That gave me pause. She looked away. "I was cruel to you, all our lives." I thought, if I kept you small, I'd stay big. But then you walked in wearing that dress, and I realized how afraid I was of you. Afraid? You became someone without needing to be me, and I couldn't even be me without the lies. The honesty rattled me. You sued me. I know. I panicked. I was losing everything, and I thought, if I could just make you the villain, maybe. She didn't finish. I didn't need her to. You put me through hell. I know. And now you're here, on my couch. I deserve worse. I sipped my tea. We didn't speak for the rest of breakfast. Later that week, Arabella got a part-time job at a bookstore downtown. She came home exhausted, her hands smudged with ink and dust. She never complained. I watched her slowly become something unfamiliar. Human. One night, I found her in the kitchen scribbling in a notebook. "What's that?" She shut it quickly. "Just ideas." "For what?" "A blog. Maybe a memoir." I stared. She bit her lip. Not a tell-all, just something honest about what it means to fall. And maybe, if I get up again, what that looks like too. People would read that. Would you? I didn't answer. The days turned to weeks. The tension softened. Not forgiveness, but coexistence. Then one afternoon, she stood at the door with her suitcase packed. "I found a room," she said. "Tiny place, but it's mine." I nodded. "That's good." She hesitated. "Thank you. For the couch, for not turning me away." I didn't say anything. She opened the door, then turned back. "You deserved better, Elise. Always did." Then she was gone. I stood alone in the hallway, unsure how to feel. Relief? Closure? But it wasn't the end. 3 months later, her blog went viral. Tuaka Orr, title, "The Dress That Undid Me, **. And suddenly, Arabella Monroe was back. But this time, not as the queen of lies, but as the girl who finally told the truth. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Because redemption is a beautiful thing. Until it belongs to someone who nearly destroyed you. And that, I feared, was a story only just beginning. The morning Arabella's blog hit 100,000 shares, I woke up to 26 texts and 2 missed calls from Leo. "Kamsheks, smanurj turj, did you see it? Damsheks?" "Tox, you're in it. Not sure how I feel." I sat up in bed, fingers fumbling for my laptop. The blog was everywhere now. BuzzFeed had reposted it. So had Elle. It was even on the front page of Reddit. "The Dress That Undid Me, ** by Arabella Monroe." I stared at the title. My stomach turned. I read. It began with her childhood, the pressure, the expectations, the unreachable standards she set for herself. Then it morphed into confession. She talked about the wedding, the dress, the slap, me. She never used my name directly, only referring to me as my sister, but the details made it unmistakable. She wrote about how I walked into that estate in a gown that silenced every room. And how, for the first time in her life, she saw what it felt like to be eclipsed. She admitted the affair. She admitted the trust fund. She even admitted the lawsuit. Then came the twist I wasn't prepared for. She wrote about her childhood, the night she stole my diary, the time she cut my favorite dress and said it was an accident, the years she spent crafting a narrative where I was always the shadow. I made my sister small, she wrote, because I was afraid of how much light she had. I slammed the laptop shut. The worst part? It was a good piece. Vulnerable, raw, honest. Manipulative? Maybe. Or maybe she'd actually changed. But I didn't know what to do with the rage swelling in my chest. Because as the story spread, so did the narrative. Arabella Monroe, the fallen heiress, now reformed. A phoenix from the ashes. A woman who faced herself. And me? Just the silhouette in her rebirth. Leo called again. This time I picked up. She's everywhere, he said. I know. How do you feel? Like I just got pickpocketed in front of a cheering crowd. He exhaled. You want me to release the behind-the-scenes photos? The design process? The truth? No, I said, though my teeth ached. Not yet. Daniel texted an hour later. She got a book deal. Penguin. $500,000. Strikes. I put my phone down and screamed into a pillow. I had spent years clawing my way to self-worth. She spent 3 months sleeping on my couch and came out the other side with a redemption arc and a publishing contract. It wasn't fair, but life rarely is. And then the interview started. She went on a podcast called Unfiltered, hosted by a smug man in designer glasses who practically worshipped her. So, he asked, was there ever a moment you thought, I went too far with my sister? She nodded slowly. When I slapped her, I saw the look in her eyes. Not hurt, not shock, just done, like I didn't matter anymore. And did you? She smiled sadly. I do now, but she doesn't owe me anything. That part went viral. So did her tears. So did her story. And still, she never used my name. Because to say it out loud would mean admitting she hadn't done this on her own. I waited for her to call. She never did. Then, one morning, I got an invite. It was to her book launch. Gold embossed, heavy paper, no message, just my name and a date. I laughed. Then I bought a new dress. This time, I didn't ask Leo to design it. I made it myself. Simple, bold, structured, midnight green. I walked into the venue like a storm wrapped in silk. The room turned. Again. Arabella saw me. She stood at the center of a crowd, signing books. Her eyes widened. She faltered, then smiled. I approached slowly. The cameras found me fast. You came, she said softly. Of course. It wouldn't be a redemption arc without a final act. She winced. I deserved that. No, I said, you deserve this. All of it. The book, the stage, the applause. Because now you know what it costs. She nodded slowly. I'd like to thank you. In my next book. Properly. By name. I smiled. Not as your sister. She blinked. As your equal, I added. Then I turned and walked away, the lights trailing behind me. And that, I realized, was what healing felt like. Not silence. Not revenge. Just finally being too free to care who applauded who. But Arabella wasn't done. Because her next chapter wasn't about me. It was about our mother. And that would unravel everything. Even the parts one had spent years trying to forget. Arabella's second book was announced before the ink was dry on the first round of press tours. The working title? Mother, Mine. I found out the same way the rest of the world did. A tweet. Breaking, Arabella Monroe signs second book deal. A memoir exploring maternal pressure, legacy, and identity. The cover was already in mock-up, stark white with a red thread unraveling across the spine. My stomach turned. I called Leo. He was the only one who would understand the strange shape of my dread. She's writing about Mom, I said as soon as he answered. Oh dear God, he breathed. Is she going to name names this time? She didn't say. But if she does, I'm in that story too. Do you want me to leak something? Steer the narrative back? No, I said. I need to be ready. He was quiet. Then, do you think she's doing this to clear the air or to light it on fire? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Weeks passed. The book went into production. Arabella was everywhere again. Photo shoots, long-form interviews, even a TEDx talk titled The Myth of the Perfect Daughter. Every clip showed her bathed in golden light, her voice soft, her eyes shimmering with just the right amount of regret. But in private, my inbox stayed empty. Not a word from her. Not a warning. Not a draft. The day the galley copies were released to media, a journalist contacted me. Kumtime, hi Elise, asterisk. Kumtime, I know this is delicate, but Arabella's new book includes some deeply personal passages about your family. Would you be willing to comment? I declined. Then I bought the galley myself and read it in one sitting. The first chapter opened with a memory I hadn't thought of in years. Me, age 7, standing in the hallway in an itchy dress while Mom brushed Arabella's hair for over an hour. You'll never look like her, Mom had said flatly, but you can at least behave. Arabella had remembered it. And written it. Word for word. The book spiraled from there, page after page. She peeled open the truth we had all pretended didn't exist. Our mother's favoritism, the years of conditional love, the pressure to be exceptional, thin, adored, the way she was taught to weaponize praise and withdraw affection like a punishment. She wrote about the legacy she carried, the pain she inflicted, the apologies she still owed. By chapter 12, I was crying. By chapter 17, I was shaking. She wrote about me, again. This time, by name. Elise Monroe is the bravest person I know, not because she forgave me, but because she learned to live without needing to. She survived both me and the woman who made us. Shops I wouldn't have. I closed the book. The silence in my flat was deafening. The next morning, she called. I didn't ask your permission, she said softly. I know I should have. You didn't just write about Mom, Arabella. You wrote about me. I know. You dragged our ghosts out for applause. No, I dragged myself out. And the ghosts were already there. I just finally stopped pretending I couldn't see them. I didn't know what to say. She exhaled. I won't be offended if you hate me. But I want you to know, I didn't write this to steal your light. I wrote it because you showed me how to survive the dark. I stared out my window. Rain hit the glass softly, like a lullaby. What happens now? I asked. We let the world decide. And if they decide wrong? Then we'll still know, you and me, what really happened, what it cost. There was a long pause. Then I said, I don't forgive you. I know. But I see you now. That's enough. We hung up. A week later, I was invited to a panel. Sibling stories, writing, wounds, and redemption. Arabella would be there. So would I. And for the first time in our lives, we would share a stage. Not as rivals, not as strangers, but as two women who survived the same storm and chose, finally, to stop throwing each other overboard. The panel was set in a glass atrium on the top floor of a literary institute in Bloomsbury. Morning light streamed through the curved windows, casting long shadows on the stage where 3 velvet chairs waited. My palms were damp, my heart a metronome on overdrive. There were maybe 100 people in the audience, readers, critics, writers, everyone who had followed the saga of Arabella Monroe, from glamorous heiress to scandal to self-styled redemption author. And me, the sister she never stopped writing about. I waited backstage while the first panelist spoke, a poet with a memoir about grief. His words echoed over the small speakers behind the curtain. But I wasn't listening. I was staring at my own reflection in a backstage mirror. Midnight blue dress. Clean lines. Minimal makeup. I looked calm. I was not calm. A stage manager appeared beside me. You're up in 5. I nodded and turned to see Arabella walking down the corridor. She wore black, no jewelry, a soft wool coat that looked second-hand and purposeful. She saw me and hesitated. You look good, she said, voice tentative. Thanks. She walked up slowly. This is going to be weird. Extremely. Then a tiny smile. Let's try not to burn the place down. No promises. They announced our names over the speakers. The moderator gave some polished bio introductions. Then we walked out together. The crowd was silent, curious, cautious. We sat. The moderator smiled. Let's talk about family. Arabella laughed. So did the audience. Both of you have become symbols of something bigger than yourselves, the moderator began. Arabella, your blog and memoir struck a nerve. Elise, your silence spoke volumes. How do you each view the public perception of your story? Arabella answered first. I think people want heroes and villains. But life doesn't work like that. I was both, still am. And Elise? She was never the villain. She was the person I hurt the most. The moderator turned to me. Elise? I took a breath. Public perception doesn't change private truth. What matters to me is how we live after the page turns. More nods. A few people scribbled notes. Do you feel like you've forgiven her? Another panelist asked. I paused. No, but I feel like I don't need to anymore. Not to move on. Arabella didn't flinch. She nodded. Someone in the audience asked a bolder question. Was writing your healing or your weapon? Arabella took the mic. Both. She said it simply, honestly. The conversation shifted to legacy, the impact of mothers, and whether telling your truth means hurting the people in it. Arabella finally spoke about Mom openly. She believed love had to be earned, and she taught us that the better daughter was the more obedient one. That shaped everything. I stared at my lap. Then I said I used to think I was born broken, but I was just born inconvenient. Gasps. Quiet ones. The moderator blinked. Elise, would you ever write your own version? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Arabella looked over. Her eyes were glassy. She smiled. I'd read it. We left the stage to applause. Not for her. Not for me. For both of us. Backstage, Arabella reached for her coat. I meant what I said. About reading your book. If you write it, Elise, it might help someone. It might help you. I nodded slowly. I think I finally know what to say. We walked outside together. No security. No photographers. Just two women stepping into an ordinary street after an extraordinary war. I watched her walk away, coat fluttering behind her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking behind her. I was walking beside myself. And now? It was time for my story. The real one. The one she couldn't tell. Because it didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. I didn't start writing right away. I let the panel settle inside me like a stone in a quiet pond. Ripples spread for days. My inbox filled with interview requests. My DMs flooded. And Arabella? She kept rising. But this time, I wasn't shrinking beneath her. I wasn't shrinking at all. A month later, I sat down with a blank page. At the top, I wrote, what she never knew. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I wrote about the nights I hid in the linen closet just to breathe without hearing comparisons. About the time I won a school art contest and Mom told me, don't get distracted. Pretty girls don't need hobbies. I wrote about the time Arabella sabotaged my university application by accidentally throwing out the letter. I wrote about my silence and how it became armor. The first essay was clunky, the second better. By the fifth, I couldn't stop. I wasn't writing to retaliate. I was writing to release. Leo read one and called me in tears. You have something, Elise. Something real. Daniel sent it to a friend at a literary magazine. They published it online under a pseudonym. 3 days later, it had over 80,000 reads. The Crepusum Lan Elise Monroe speaks. Eventually, I removed the pseudonym. Let the world know my name. Within weeks, an agent reached out, then 2 more. Then a small imprint. Then a big one. Arabella sent flowers. I'm proud of you, asterisk the card read. And for once, it didn't feel like a trick. It felt earned. At the official pitch meeting, the editor leaned forward and said, "We want the truth, unvarnished, the dress, the lawsuit, the sisterhood, the fallout, all of it." I agreed. But on one condition, the last chapter would be about me, not her, not Mom, not the dress. Me. Arabella called the night the deal was announced. They asked if I felt overshadowed now, she said. What did you say? That I'd never stood in your shadow. I stood in your light and didn't recognize it. I let the silence bloom. Are we okay? She asked. I didn't answer right away. We're better than we were, I said. That might be enough. She accepted that. And in that moment, maybe, I did too. Months passed. The book took shape. I rewrote chapters, cried through edits, laughed at old drafts. My story came alive. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore, or the slap, or the dress. It was about survival. It was about becoming. The day my manuscript was finalized, I walked to the same estate where Arabella had married Callum. It was closed to the public, quiet, still. I stood at the garden where it all unraveled. I imagined myself in that dress again, but not the silk. The one I wore beneath it. The one made of scars and spine and slow healing. And then I sat on the same bench, where Daniel first told me the truth, where Arabella first cracked, where I first chose to stop being afraid. I sat there as Elise Monroe, not the sister, not the shadow, not the afterthought, just me. And it was more than enough. Because this time, the story belonged to me, and I was just getting started. The launch date crept closer like a tide I couldn't stop. My publisher sent the cover mock-ups, simple, elegant, navy blue with a small gold title pressed into the center, What She Never Knew, a memoir by Elise Monroe. Holding the first printed copy felt like standing inside a cathedral I had built from ruins. But I hadn't expected what came next. The media blitz. The praise. The anger. Yes, there was anger. Old family friends called to say they were disappointed. I aired our laundry. Mom left a voicemail. I hope you enjoy your 15 minutes, Elise. But we both know how this ends. I didn't call her back. I did, however, meet with Arabella for tea the day before my first live interview. We sat on a rooftop terrace near Piccadilly, bundled in coats, sipping from chipped mugs. You nervous? She asked. Terrified. Good. That means it matters. I watched her stir her tea. Are you okay with the parts one wrote about you? She nodded. It was your story. You told it with more grace than I deserved. Some people are upset. Some people need to believe the past was prettier than it was. Let them lie to themselves. We clinked mugs. That night, I lay awake thinking about what might happen once the world read everything. The lawsuit, the betrayal, the slap, the garden, the healing. Would they believe me? Would they twist it? Would they say I was the villain after all? But when the morning came, I sat in front of a camera for the national morning show and told the truth. The anchor leaned in. Was there a moment you realized you were no longer the supporting character in your own life? I smiled, yes, when I stopped apologizing for being hard to ignore. The segment went viral. Not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. Arabella texted, "You were brilliant. You always were. I just refused to see it." 2 weeks later, my book hit the bestseller list. I got a letter from someone I didn't expect. Callum. Num orns care, Elise. Dear Elise, asterisk. Read your book. Twice. Once as the man who watched the damage unfold. And again, as the man who participated by staying silent. I should have done more. I didn't. I see that now. Noakes on Keys, so Arabella was many things. But she wasn't a monster. And you? You weren't a side character. You were the backbone. Thank you for telling the truth, even when it cost you. I folded the letter and placed it beside Arabella's apology. They didn't cancel each other out, but they belonged together. That spring, I was invited to speak at a women's literature conference in Edinburgh. My panel followed 2 powerhouse novelists and a poet who had just won a major prize. I felt small again, but only for a minute. Then I walked onto the stage, and the applause started before I said a word. I told my story. I saw women cry in the audience. I saw a young girl in the front row clutching a copy of my book like it was a lighthouse. Afterward, she approached me, shy, quiet. My sister always said I was invisible. Your book made me feel seen. I hugged her, and as I did, I realized this was the real reason I wrote it. Not for vengeance, not for validation, but for her. For every girl who was told to dim her light. For every woman still trying to take up space she was told didn't belong to her. And for myself. To remember who I had become. To protect who I still was. The emails continued. The book clubs. The podcast invites. And with every message, every tearful thank you, every new reader, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. Arabella had rewritten herself. Now I had too. But mine was not a redemption arc. It was a reclamation. And as the summer approached, one more surprise would arrive. Not a threat. Not a scandal. But an invitation. From the last person I ever expected. Mom. And she didn't want to talk. She wanted me to write her story. When the envelope arrived, I almost didn't open it. My name written in her hand, sharp, loopless, cold as ever. Inside was a single page, folded twice. Mein Ninhas, Elise, asterisk. You have told your version, Arabella has told hers. The truth is mine now, and I would like you to write it. Come to the house. I won't ask twice. Twanspaisk, mother. There was no signature. No warmth. Just a demand wrapped in the illusion of grace. I stared at the page for a long time. I hadn't been to the house in over 5 years. Not since the last Christmas, the one where Arabella got a diamond bracelet and I got a fruitcake. Where I tried to speak up and was told, don't make this about you. Quote, but something in the letter felt different, like a crack had opened in the stone, just wide enough for a single beam of light. I packed a bag and took the train. The estate sat where it always had, perched on the edge of the countryside like it was watching the world go by without flinching. The hedges were taller, the roses overgrown. The front door opened before I reached it. She stood in the foyer. Older, smaller, still formidable. You came, she said. You asked. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She turned and walked back into the house like a general returning to her barracks. I followed. The kitchen was spotless. The living room frozen in time. She gestured to the armchair. I sat. She didn't. Arabella made me the villain. She made you human, I said. Her jaw tightened. And you? You made me irrelevant. You did that yourself. She stared at me for a long time. Then, I wasn't always like this. I know. Then why did you both forget the rest? Because we were surviving the present. She paced. I want to tell you everything. I want my story told. Why me? She stopped, looked me in the eye. Because you're the only one who won't lie for me, or to me. I sat with that. Then nodded. Fine, but on my terms. Agreed. We started the next day. She spoke, I recorded. Each morning she brewed tea, pulled out a thick manila folder, and opened a vein. I learned things I never knew. About her mother, cold, brutal, religious to the point of weaponry. about the man she almost married before Dad, about the miscarriage she never told anyone about the early years with Arabella, the postpartum depression, the fear that she had already failed. I watched her transform in front of me. Not into someone soft, but into someone whole. One afternoon I asked her, "Why did you treat us so differently?" She didn't flinch. "Because I saw myself in you, and I never liked myself." The silence was a scream. That night I walked the halls of the house, remembering. The staircase I fell down at age 9, the closet Arabella locked me in, the room I was told not to redecorate because it was temporary. It all came back. And still I kept writing. For 2 weeks we worked. By the end I had 3 notebooks full, dozens of recordings, a shape beginning to form. The final morning she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "My will." I blinked. "You're not dying." "Eventually I will. And this time, no secrets." I opened it. Read the lines. "A clean split. Arabella and I. Equal. No tricks. No clauses. Why now?" She exhaled. "Because I am tired of ghosts." I left that afternoon. Back in London, I called Arabella. She told me about the miscarriage. Arabella went silent. She told me a lot. "Are you going to write it?" "Yes. But not as an apology, as a history." Arabella was quiet again. Then write it well. And I would. Because the truth isn't always about who was wrong. Sometimes it's just about what was hidden. And if my story was about reclaiming my voice, then hers was about laying the silence to rest. Not absolution. Not forgiveness. Just an ending. And perhaps a beginning. The letter from Mom came in a thick envelope, sealed with a wax stamp that looked oddly regal. Trust her to dramatize even an apology, but when I opened it, it wasn't an apology at all. It was an offer. Nike Salis, asterisk. Nike Salis it, you have your version, Arabella has hers. The world applauds you both. But neither of you know the full truth. You think I was cruel. I was a wall you pushed against to grow. But I had reasons. I had a story before I was your mother's. Snakugger write it. Snakugger write it. Snakugger prios come see me. I'll tell you everything. No edits, no lies, just the truth. Asterisk asterisk dash Emma. I stared at the page, unsure whether to laugh or rip it in half. She hadn't reached out in months, hadn't responded when the book dropped. Left that one bitter voicemail and disappeared. And now she wanted Smell to be her biographer? Still, the letter lingered on my desk for days. I took it to therapy, I took it to Leo, I even showed Arabella. She read it and said, "If you go, be ready to hear things that will shatter you." I thought we were already shattered. Not like this. I packed a small overnight bag, dressed simply, and boarded the train to Sussex. The house hadn't changed. Still crisp white shutters, still roses along the path that always seemed like they bloomed in spite of the cold. Mom answered the door herself. She had aged, not dramatically, but in the way a statue might wear rain. She stepped aside. "Come in." I walked past the threshold, half expecting her to rescind the invitation. "Tea?" "Always." We sat in the drawing room, where silence had once reigned like a tyrant. "Why now?" I asked. She sipped, set the cup down. "Because if I die, you'll only have pieces. I want you to know why I became what I was." And then she began. She told me about her own mother, a woman who used silence as punishment and performance as currency, a woman who made love conditional and mistakes unforgivable. She spoke of a father who drank ambition straight into violence, of fleeing at 17, of marrying my father not out of love but safety. I tried to build a fortress, Elise, not a home, and then I had daughters, and I panicked. I didn't know how to raise women without turning them into soldiers. I said nothing. My hands trembled around my mug. Arabella became what I could praise. You became what I feared. that one cut deep. Why fear me? She looked up. Because you didn't bend. You absorbed, but you never broke. You watched me, and I could see the judgment in your eyes. And it was fair. A clock ticked somewhere. A storm moved across the horizon. And now? I whispered. Now I want the world to know that you became more than I ever let you be. Write my story. Write all of it. I won't censor. I won't run. I left the next morning with 6 boxes of journals, photos, letters, and a key to her locked armoire. Arabella called the second I boarded the train. You okay? No, but I will be. She told you everything? Enough. Over the next 3 months, I built a timeline. A childhood that explained her cruelty. A marriage that quieted her ambitions. Choices that weren't just cold, but calculated. And regrets she had buried under layers of discipline. I wrote and wrote. And slowly a strange empathy bloomed. Not forgiveness. Not exoneration. But understanding. I titled it The Woman Behind the Mirror. I told the truth. All of it. And when the draft was done, I sent it to her. Weeks passed. Then a single note arrived. Mexne told Schnups it hurt. But it was honest. Thank you. She didn't ask for edits. She didn't ask for control. And that, in itself, was a kind of healing. The memoir was published a year later, under my name and hers. It was unlike anything I had ever written. Not a reclamation. Not a redemption. But a reckoning. And when I stood at the launch, Arabella on one side, Mom on the other, I realized something. We had all survived. Not because we were strong, but because we finally chose to tell the truth. And now, the world knew it too. By the time The Woman Behind the Mirror reached bookstores, I was no longer Elise Monroe, the girl in the background of someone else's fairy tale. I was the author of 2 bestsellers, the woman who stared down the very architecture of her family's silence and wrote it into light. But fame, even the thoughtful kind, is a strange guest. It sleeps in your inbox, eats your peace, and walks beside you into grocery stores and airports. Most people were kind. Some cried. A few just stared like I was a myth given form. Then came the letters. Hundreds. Women from every walk of life. Some cross, my mother never loved me. Koe Jowo, I was always the sister who disappeared in the photos. Koe Jowo. Koe Joas Joawiafori helped me name my pain. I answered every one I could. Because I remembered the ache of invisibility. But even in the glow of success, there was one question I hadn't answered. One call I hadn't returned. Daniel. We hadn't spoken since the first book tour ended. Not because we fought, but because something had begun, something tentative, fragile. And I wasn't sure I had the space to feel it. Until the night he showed up at my reading in Oxford. I was halfway through a chapter when I saw him, standing in the back. Same half smile, same scarred as jaw, same steady gaze that used to see through my armor like glass. Afterward, he waited outside while I signed copies and shook hands. When the crowd thinned, he stepped forward. You were brilliant. You always say that. Because it's always true. We stood in silence. Then I said, why now? He looked down. Because I didn't want to be another character in your story. I wanted to be something real. And I didn't know if you had room for that. And now? Now I think you do. I didn't kiss him, not then, but I reached for his hand. And he didn't let go. We started slowly. Walks, late-night calls, quiet mornings over coffee. No drama, no declarations. Just something solid, gentle. Something I hadn't known I needed until it arrived. Arabella noticed first. You seem unguarded, she said over brunch. Is that bad? It's terrifying. And lovely. Mom noticed next. She visited for a weekend, staying in a small bed and breakfast down the street. We didn't talk about the past, we made pancakes, walked through museums, read quietly in the same room. That was her version of an apology. And I took it. One afternoon, as she packed her bag, she said, "I was wrong, Elise, about so many things, but especially about you." I didn't cry, but I touched her hand before she left. Because some doors close quietly, and some stay open with no words at all. The fall brought another surprise. Leo called. "Are you sitting down?" "Should I be?" "I submitted your dress, the midnight blue one, to the British Fashion Archives, as an artifact. They accepted." I blinked. As what? A cultural symbol, of reclamation, of sisterhood, of survival. I didn't speak. He added, "They want you to speak at the installation. Tell the story." So I did. I stood beside a glass case that held the dress I once wore as armor. And I told the room how I was never meant to be the girl in the spotlight. How I had once believed my worth lived only in shadows. And how that dress didn't transform me. It revealed me. Not because Leo stitched magic into the seams, but because, for the first time, I stood tall enough to be seen. The applause was quiet, respectful. Afterward, a woman with silver hair came up and whispered, "I gave my sister that same look your Arabella gave you. I never said sorry. Thank you for helping me try." I hugged her, and I cried. Because healing isn't just personal. It echoes. It ripples. It travels. And sometimes, it lands exactly where it's needed. But just when I thought my story had come full circle, I got a call. From a film producer. "Elise," she said, "I just finished your memoirs, and I don't want to adapt your story." Pause. "I want you to * write the screenplay." I stared out the window. The city pulsed below. "So," she asked, "are you ready to tell the world again?" And without hesitating this time, I said, "Yes, but this time I want to direct it too. Because now I didn't just have a story. I had a voice. And no one was taking the pen from my hand again. Writing a screenplay is nothing like writing a book. A book lets you linger, meander through thoughts, bathe in emotion. A screenplay demands clarity, precision, the bones of a moment without the breath around it. I had to learn to let go of my favorite sentences, my quiet internal dialogues, the poetic asides I once clung to. And I loved it. It forced me to trust the images, to believe in what could be shown rather than told. I rented a small studio flat in Camden for the summer. It had terrible lighting, a broken heater, and a desk that creaked every time I exhaled. But it was mine. I wrote like I was running out of time. Arabella visited once. She sat cross-legged on the floor, reading pages as I printed them. "You wrote me sharp," she said. "You were sharp." "I like her. She's a mess." "She's you." "She's me, if I was brave sooner." Quote. I paused. "She's you if you had known I loved you even when I hated what you did." That silenced her. She stood and hugged me. No words. Just breath. Just time folding in on itself. Daniel came often. He brought food, proofread, listened to my rants about dialogue pacing and camera angles. "You're turning into a director," he said one night. I think I always was. I just didn't have a camera yet. The production house approved the script without major rewrites. A rarity, a miracle. We began casting. I thought it would be strange to see someone play me. It wasn't. It was liberating. She was younger, hungrier. But she got the spirit. She had my quiet fire, my precision, my longing to matter. Watching her on camera felt like watching a version of myself I had forgotten. Arabella insisted on choosing her own actress. "I want someone who isn't beautiful in the usual way. Someone who looks like she could break you with a smile and mend you with a glance." Sounds about right. Filming began in early spring. Leo designed the costumes. Mom visited the set once. She didn't say much. Just watched the garden scene replay again and again until she finally whispered, "You made it less cruel than it was." That was for me. She nodded. Then left before I could cry. The final week of filming, I stood behind the camera, headset on, watching the moment that had started it all. The dress. The aisle. The laughter. The slap. The silence. I watched my past played back to me through lenses and light, and I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't even about recognition. This was about finally being able to look at my story without flinching. At the wrap party, the cast toasted me. The young woman who played me handed me a note. Skruxos some sosas kos trisos some so until I read your script. Thank you for writing her. Thank you for writing you sprech kumshoch perkshires spreechers. Daniel kissed my temple. She was always in there. You just needed the world to catch up. The film premiered at the London Independent Festival. Sold out. Standing ovation. Arabella sat beside me. Squeezed my hand as the credits rolled. Mom cried. I didn't. I smiled. Not because I was proud, but because I was finally at peace. A reporter asked afterward, "Would you say this was your happy ending?" I thought about it. About the girl who once stood at the edge of every family photo. About the woman who wore a midnight dress like armor. About the sister who slapped me, and the mother who built walls instead of homes. About the man who held my hand not because I needed saving, but because I finally believed I didn't. No, I said. It's not the end. It's just the first time I chose how the story ends. But it turns out, the world wasn't quite finished with me. Because one morning, 6 months later, a letter arrived. From my father. And I hadn't heard from him in over 15 years. The envelope was plain, no wax seal, no elegant script, just a scrawl I hadn't seen since I was 13, when he signed the custody papers and vanished. Tuxok. Noelle's asterisk was written in block letters, no return address. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. No preamble. Just this. I saw the film. I wasn't ready for what it brought up. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to explain, if you're willing to hear it. Asterisk, Dad. I stared at it for hours. Daniel found me like that when he came home from work. Is that who I think it is? I nodded. He sat beside me, waited. I whispered, he wants to meet. Do you want to? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The last time I saw my father, I was clutching a stuffed rabbit and watching him load a single suitcase into a dented Volvo. He didn't kiss my forehead. He didn't hug me. He just said, be good, and drove away. I didn't cry then, but I cried now. Arabella was hesitant when I told her. What if he tries to rewrite history too? Then I'll write it down first. She nodded. I'll go with you if you want. No, I said. I need to see him as me, not as a sister, not as a daughter, just me. He chose a cafe in Brighton, neutral ground, public, safe. I arrived early. Ordered tea I wouldn't drink. Then I saw him. Older, thinner, eyes sunken with time. He paused when he saw me, then approached slowly. Hi, Elise. I nodded. He sat. Silence stretched. Then he said, you look just like your mother, but you sit like me, you always did. You remember how I sit? I remember everything. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn photo, me and Arabella on the swings. A Polaroid from a summer I barely recalled. I kept this in my wallet all these years, even when I didn't have anything else. Why did you leave? He swallowed, looked out the window. Because I was a coward. Your mother and I were poison for each other. I thought if I stayed, I'd destroy you both. Quote, you did anyway. He nodded. I know. You could have written, called, anything. I tried, at first. But your mom, she made it clear I wasn't welcome. And I let that be the excuse. I let you become a ghost I was too ashamed to look at. I stared at the tea. I watched the film, he said, and I saw what I missed. Not just events, but you, who you became, who you always were. I looked at him, really looked. and saw something strange. Regret that wasn't performative. Grief without agenda. Why now? He leaned forward. Because I want to know you, before I run out of time. Are you sick? No, just older, and finally awake. I didn't forgive him. But I didn't walk away. We talked for an hour, then 2, then made plans for another. Afterward, I walked the pier alone, waves crashing beneath the boards. He was a ghost I thought I'd buried. But now? He was just a man. One who failed. One who showed up late. But one who showed up. And that, I was learning, was its own kind of courage. Weeks passed. We met again and again. Slowly, carefully. One night, he handed me a small notebook. What's this? My story, the one I never told. I opened it, pages filled with shaky handwriting. Regret, memory, love that never got said out loud. And somewhere near the middle. She walked down the aisle alone, but she walked like someone who finally understood her worth. I watched her on screen, but I remembered her on the swing, laughing. And I realized I had never known her at all, but I wanted to. That night, I added a new chapter to my screenplay. A man in the shadows. Watching a premiere. Crying quietly as a young girl in a midnight dress took back her story. Because sometimes, the ones who leave aren't gone. They're just waiting for the right door to open. And sometimes, we are the ones who have to unlock it. Even if our hands still shake on the key. Even if the lock is rusted shut. We try. Because every story deserves a chance to end differently than it began. Autumn painted the city in copper and gold. The air was crisp, the kind that begged for sweaters and long walks, with hands tucked into someone else's coat pockets. Daniel and I had just moved in together. A sunlit flat in Islington with squeaky floors and a view of the chapel tower that chimed every hour. Life was quiet. Beautiful. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. It never did. One afternoon, I received a call from my editor. Elise, we have a request. From the Times. They want a long-form essay from you. Theme, what I've learned since telling my story. I hesitated. You don't have to say yes, she said. No, I want to. I don't know how to condense it. She laughed. That's your gift. You make the complicated feel intimate. So I wrote. I wrote about voice. About reclaiming the narrative. About how the moment you stop asking for permission to be seen, the whole world shifts. I talked about Arabella. About our mother. About the dress, the slap, the audience. And I talked about the quiet aftermath. The long mornings, the uncomfortable healing, the days when the ghosts still visit and ask to be named. The essay was published on the front page of the Sunday edition, titled, Asterisk, the day I wrote myself into existence. Asterisk, the response was overwhelming. Letters, flowers, more stories. From men this time too. Fathers, brothers, sons. One note read, Your words helped me apologize to a daughter who never stopped waiting. Thank you for giving me a map. I cried. But this time the tears felt clean. Arabella invited me to her podcast. The one she had launched after her second book. We titled the episode, The Other Side of the Mirror. We talked about growing up inside a family that didn't know how to be one. About making art from fracture. About how forgiveness isn't a single act, but 1,000 quiet choices to stop bleeding on the people who didn't cut you. The episode became the most downloaded in the show's history. That same week, Leo called. You need to see what I just designed. He sent a sketch. A dress. Not armor this time, but wings. It's for you, he said, for whatever you choose to do next. I laughed through the tears. You never stop surprising me. Neither do you. A month later, Arabella and I hosted our first joint writing retreat. 20 women. 3 days in the countryside. Stories shared over candlelight and red wine. On the final night, one woman stood up and said, I didn't come here to be healed. I came here to remember I was never broken. We all clapped. We all wept. That night, as Arabella and I sat on the porch overlooking the fields, she said, "You know, I used to think you were dangerous." I was. Not in the way I meant, in the way I needed. You were the mirror I didn't want to look into. And now? She exhaled. Now you're the compass. Daniel arrived the next morning to drive me home. He kissed my forehead and said, "How was the sisterhood of the traveling trauma?" I laughed so hard I almost dropped my tea. But he was right. That's what it was. A sisterhood. Not just by blood, but by story, by truth, by the audacity to claim our place in a world that once told us to stay small. Later that winter, I was asked to give a commencement speech at a university. My final line was simple. Whatever story they wrote you into, you can always write yourself out. I stepped down from the podium to a standing ovation. And as I walked off stage, I saw her, my younger self, in the front row, midnight dress, barefoot, smiling. And I knew, finally, she was proud of me. Because I hadn't just written the story she never got to live. I lived it for both of us. But there were still pages left. And I had just picked up the pen again. The letter sat unopened for 3 days. I moved it from desk to counter, counter to nightstand. I told myself I was too busy, too tired, too indifferent. But really, I was terrified. 15 years of silence carried weight, the kind of weight you can't measure, only feel in the pit of your stomach. On the 4th morning, Daniel handed it to me as I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee. "It's time." I nodded. I opened it. It was handwritten on lined paper, creased and slightly smudged. But it was unmistakably his. Elise, asterisk. "You don't owe me anything. Least of all your time. But I watched your film. I read your books. I saw the story you had to tell to survive. Times I left, because I didn't know how to stay. And now I don't know how to return. What if you ever want to hear my story, I'm ready to tell it. When per times samati one male colases. When for times samati one male colases. Colases I live quietly now. In Valencia, alone. A life I built from the ashes of everything I destroyed. Policy of Thiles o Dar, policy of 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 Thiles. When per time so e tiles, alicy of Dar. Policy of Thiles, alicy of Dar. Policy of Thiles, alicy of Dar. Policy of Thiles, alicy of Dar. I should have always. Tiles chimes, love, asterisk, awaries dar, mun per dar. Tiles chimes dar, tiles dar. Little lies. Then a third time. Then a third time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat down and wrote back. Tiles chime, I don't know if I'm ready. But I want to know who you became, and I want you to know who I did too. The her you became, nos chime hober abaus chime, but I'm opening the door. Asterix, Elise. It was a small gesture, but small gestures, I'd learned, often held the loudest truths. 2 weeks later, a postcard arrived. A photograph of an old church bathed in sunset. Small Valencia is beautiful, but it would be more so if you visited. I turned it over. The handwriting was the same, still a little shaky. Arabella and I met for lunch in Soho. You're gonna go, aren't you? I nodded. Not yet, but soon. Want company? I smiled. No, I think this one needs to be mine alone. You're braver than I am. No, just tired of letting the past talk over me. She reached for my hand. Whatever happens, you win, because you're not hiding. I booked the ticket that night. 2 weeks in Valencia. No schedule. Just a name, a street address, and a question waiting to be answered. When I arrived, he was waiting outside his apartment. He looked older than the letter had prepared me for, but he smiled. You came. I did. He gestured awkwardly. Do you want to come in or walk? Let's walk. We strolled through narrow streets filled with orange trees and the scent of baked bread. For an hour, we didn't speak about the past. Then, as we reached a quiet plaza, he said, I watched you become the kind of woman I was never strong enough to raise. I didn't reply. He added, but you raised yourself. And that I could accept. We didn't try to catch up on 15 years. We just shared the present. Stories, meals, old music, long silences. He told me about the things he regretted, the things he wished he had done, the nights he watched interviews of mine and whispered apologies I thought I'd never hear. I didn't forgive him all at once, but I listened. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. On the final night, we sat under a balcony strung with fairy lights. He poured wine, toasted nothing in particular, and said, I never deserved to see the woman you became, but I'm grateful I did. I looked at him. You may never be the father I needed, but you showed up, and that counts for something. We clinked glasses. He smiled. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. I left Valencia with more than closure. I left with another story. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And sometimes, real is more than enough. Back in London, I started writing again. A new title formed in my mind as the plane descended. Not Paul, the Ones Who Returned. Because sometimes we write the ending. And sometimes the ending finds us. The release of *The Ones Who Returned was quieter than my previous launches. There was no press tour. No red carpets. No urgent interviews. Just a table at the front of every bookstore, nestled between novels and memoirs. But somehow, that made it more meaningful. This was the story I wrote, not for the world's applause, but for my own peace. And it found its readers anyway. Letters arrived in small, careful handwriting. Knox, I saw myself in your pages. Knox, my father, never came back. But your story gave me hope that healing doesn't always require an apology. Thank you for reminding me that survival isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just quiet courage. Daniel read them with me, often blinking too fast to hide the way they hit him. You don't just tell stories, Elise, he said. You give people permission. Arabella cried when she finished the manuscript. It's your softest work, she said, and maybe your strongest. I smiled. Soft isn't weakness. I learned that from you. Mom called a week later. Not to critique, not to praise, just to talk. That, too, felt like healing. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned, like a breath I could take without flinching. And then came the letter. From a woman named Cora in a town I'd never heard of. Dear Elise, Saw I run a women's shelter in Gloucestershire. Many of our residents are survivors, not just of violence, but of erasure. They read your books in whispers. They pass your stories like gospel. Would you consider visiting us? No press, no camera, just presence, just you. I booked a train for the following weekend. When I arrived, I was met by a small group of women, some young, some older, some mothers, some alone. They handed me a cup of tea and sat in a circle. They told me their stories. I listened. And when they asked me questions, I didn't give them polished answers. I gave them the truth. I said, you don't owe anyone a perfect healing arc. You just owe yourself the chance to become something after the storm. One woman whispered, and what if the storm never ends? I looked at her and said, then you become the shelter. The room fell quiet. And in that stillness, something passed between us. Not just recognition. Resilience. Before I left, they gave me a journal. Dozens of pages, filled with handwritten notes from each woman there. This is our story now, too. Thank you for holding the mirror up. I cried in the car. Not out of sadness, but out of awe. Awe that words could do this. Could reach this far. Could matter this much. Back in London, I placed the journal beside my first script. And I knew I wasn't done yet. There was still one story left to tell. Not about my sister. Not about my parents. Not even about myself. But about what comes Tamil Tree the story ends. About rebuilding. About loving again. About staying. I opened a fresh page and wrote the title, The Life We Makes. Then I picked up the pen. Because the story never really ends. It just changes shape. And I was finally ready to shape it back. The first line I wrote in *, The Life We Make, was simple. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a practice, a ritual. A choice we make daily to keep going, even when the world forgets how hard it is. The book was different from anything I had written before. Less narrative, more reflection. Not a memoir, but a meditation. On what it means to live fully after loss. To choose joy with intention. To make a home in yourself after being exiled from it for so long. Daniel read each chapter as I finished it, sitting at the kitchen table with his glasses perched low, his tea always going cold. This one, he said once, holding a page in his hand, feels like a hug you didn't know you needed. I smiled. That's what I hoped it would be. Arabella wrote the foreword. It stunned me. There was a time I didn't believe Elise would survive the life we were given. There was a time I didn't want her to. Her existence threatened the version of myself I clung to. But now? I can't imagine this world without the one she's built. One word at a time. She ended with, Pulse, Tess. This book is a garden, and my sister is the gardener. I wept when I read it. Mom sent a card. No letter this time, just one sentence. You've made something beautiful from the dust. And she was right. The book launched softly, intentionally. No fanfare, no spectacle. Just a room full of readers who had followed me from chapter to chapter, heartbreak to triumph. I stood at the podium and read aloud from the middle. There is no shame in becoming slowly. You are not late. You are not broken. You are a story still unfolding. That night, a young man approached me. He couldn't have been more than 20. My sister passed last year, he said, voice trembling. She used to read your work to me when I was too sad to sleep. This book, it sounds like her voice. It brought her back for a minute. Thank you. We hugged. And I carried his words with me like a blessing. After the tour, Daniel and I took a trip. Just the two of us. A cabin by a lake in the Cotswolds, surrounded by trees older than any wound I carried. I swam in the mornings, wrote poetry in the afternoons. Daniel cooked. We played board games. We stayed off our phones. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he knelt and proposed. The ring was simple, vintage, nothing flashy, just like us. I said yes without blinking. Later that night, as we sat on the deck wrapped in one oversized blanket, he whispered, You said your story never really ends, but I think we just started a new volume. And he was right. The wedding was small, intimate. Arabella stood beside me as my maid of honor. Mom read a poem. My father, yes, my father, walked me partway down the aisle before pausing, kissing my hand, and stepping aside so I could finish the journey alone. I did. And I walked slowly, proudly, fully, because I had written this ending. And now, I was ready for the beginning. Months later, I launched a nonprofit, a foundation that supported young writers from fractured homes. We called it The Pen Remembers. Every scholarship, every workshop, every quiet corner we built for someone else to find their voice was proof that our stories matter. And our endings are never final. Only another blank page. And now? I sit on a bench in a city that once felt too big. A notebook in my lap, a heart finally quiet, and a life that isn't perfect. But it is mine, the one I made. And I wouldn't trade a single chapter of it. Because this, right now, is the story I was always meant to tell. The day The Pen Remembers funded its 100th writer, I stood in a room full of people I once thought I'd never meet, survivors, storytellers, dreamers. There were no spotlights, no paparazzi, just quiet joy. Each recipient had a story, a voice that had once been silenced or ignored, and now they were being heard. Arabella stood beside me, holding the journal we started together, every signature, every letter, every whisper made visible. "Elise," she whispered as the final recipient took the mic, "this is legacy, not the fame, not the awards, this." And she was right. After the ceremony, I stepped outside. Rain had started to fall. The kind of rain that didn't rush or rage, but simply reminded you that the sky, too, knows how to cry. Daniel found me there. "You okay?" I nodded, just taking it in. He slipped his arm around me. "You built this from nothing, from pain. From silence. That's not small. That's sacred." I leaned into him, knowing it was true. A week later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a dress. Midnight blue. Stitched with a note pinned to the hem. "From the designer who watched you rise. I wanted you to have something that mirrors what you gave us. Darkness turned elegant. Pain turned art." It was from Leo. I cried again. But I wore it. To a dinner with Cora and the women from Gloucestershire. They had invited me to a reunion to celebrate the publication of their first group anthology. Each woman had written a story, a poem, a memory, their own voices unfiltered. The title? Shelters We Became. I held their book in my hands and felt the world shift just a little more. During the reading, one woman said, "We thought we were rubble, but rubble is just a foundation waiting for a builder, and you, Elise, handed us the tools." I couldn't speak. I just held her. After the event, I stayed behind, alone in the chapel-turned-library they now called home. There, on a quiet table, I opened my journal and began writing something new. Not a memoir, not an essay, but fiction. Something imagined. Something wild. Because now, I didn't just want to look back. I wanted to leap forward. To dream. The next morning, Arabella called. "So I have an idea," she said. "What if we created a residency? A place where writers could come live, write, be. No deadlines, just space." "Where?" "Here," she said. "At the old farmhouse. I'm buying it back." That place was hell. "Then let's make it heaven." I laughed. "Deal." 6 months later, we launched TARP, The Rewrite, a residency for women writing themselves new. First cohort, 5 women. Each one walked in timid, each one walked out taller. The house changed too. What was once splintered became soft, cozy, warm. Even Mom visited. She brought homemade scones and a flask of tea. We sat by the fire. She turned to me and said, "I wish I had been braver when you needed me." "You are now," I said. She nodded. "Then maybe I can still learn to be proud of myself too." And I realized healing doesn't trickle down. Sometimes, it flows upward. Daniel and I eventually moved into a small cottage nearby. We kept it simple. Garden, books, laughter. Guests who stayed too long and always brought stories. And one day, I found myself on another stage. Another crowd. A question was asked. What's the one thing you'd tell the girl who stood at her sister's wedding, mocked for her dress? I answered. I'd tell her she wasn't overdressed, she was overdue, for everything. For respect, for joy, for the life she was about to write. The applause felt like thunder. And as I stepped down, Arabella met me at the foot of the stage. She held my hand, whispered, "I love you." I said, "I know." Because now, I did. We were no longer unfinished. We were rewritten. Together. The first snowfall came earlier than expected. Thick, slow flakes that blanketed the fields and softened even the sharpest corners of memory. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, watching the world go white. Arabella arrived in a flurry of scarves and excitement. "They approved it," she said breathlessly, stomping snow from her boots. "The publisher, the anthology, all of it." "You mean?" Yes, she said, beaming. Our women, our stories, in print, distributed nationwide. I stood up so quickly the notebook fell to the floor. We embraced, tight and laughing. For years we had been the stories. Now we were the stewards. Cora called that evening, her voice cracked with pride. Elise, you started something none of us can ever repay, but we'll try, every page, every poem. The anthology was titled From Ruins We Rise. I wrote the introduction. This is not a collection of wounds, it is a chorus of survival. It is the sound women make when they finally hear themselves. The launch was quiet, just like the snow, but it landed. Every bookshop window carried it. Libraries ordered extra copies. Reading circles formed. One headline read, When women tell the truth, the world listens. A girl named Elsie, 12 years old, brown eyes too old for her face, sent me a letter. My mom read your book to me. I want to be a writer too. Is that allowed? I sent back a journal and a note. Tu es marty sois, not only is it allowed, it is needed. Start writing. I'm waiting. That winter, Arabella and I taught our first masterclass at the Rewrite. We called it Voice and Vision. The women came from everywhere. Lawyers, dancers, chefs, mothers. One quiet woman who had never spoken above a whisper stood on the final night and read her first essay aloud. We cried. Again. But this time, it wasn't grief. It was glory. Daniel built us a writing barn, warm wood, slanted light, shelves lined with our favorite books. The front door had a sign etched in brass. Right here, return whole. Some days, I sat alone in that space, candle burning, pen moving, heart full. One of those days, I started writing something I didn't think I ever would. A novel. It had nothing to do with my past. It was wild, romantic, strange. A girl who could speak with constellations. A boy who stole silence for a living. Daniel read the first 3 chapters and said, Elise, this might be your most magical work yet. And it was. Because it was free, unburdened, healed. We dedicated a room at the retreat to Leo. He had passed suddenly, in his sleep, 3 weeks prior, a heart no one knew was failing, but his letters to me never stopped. The final one read, You taught me that style isn't just fabric, it's truth worn loud. If there's an afterlife, I hope it has velvet. We filled the room with his sketches, and one dress, on a mannequin, the midnight blue. A plaque beneath it read, She wore it when the world finally listened. Arabella and I sat on the floor that day, wine in hand, heads leaned together. Do you think it would have turned out like this if you hadn't worn that dress to my wedding? She asked. No, I said. I think it turned out like this because I finally let myself be seen. She nodded. I'm glad you did. We fell asleep like that, on the floor, wrapped in blankets and history. The next morning the snow began to melt. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to see the ground again, and know that spring was waiting. And so were we. A year later, on the anniversary of Asterix From Ruins We Rise, we gathered everyone. Not for a launch, not for press, just to remember. The original 5 from the Rewrite residency returned. Cora and her women from Gloucestershire came. Writers we'd never met in person, but who had mailed their hearts to us, flew in from across the country. We met at the farmhouse. That old place, once filled with ghosts, now held nothing but firelight and laughter. Arabella stood beside me on the porch. Remember the girl in the pew, being mocked for her dress? I nodded. She became the woman who built a lighthouse. I didn't speak. I just reached for her hand. Inside, the walls were strung with the first lines of stories born under our roof, each, quote, painted by hand. One read, She thought she was broken, but she was just bending toward the sun. We passed out notebooks, no agenda, just an invitation. Write whatever you need to say tonight, I told them. You don't have to share it, but if you do, we'll listen. One by one, they stood. Some read fragments, some poems. One woman, a former teacher who hadn't written since her divorce, read a letter to the version of herself she used to fear becoming. You are not ruin. You are revelations, straps. When she sat down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Daniel held my gaze from across the fire. He mouthed, "You did this." I mouthed back, "We did." At the end of the night, they asked me to read something. I hadn't prepared anything, but I knew what to say. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and said, "Once I stood at a wedding where I was mocked for wearing a dress too grand, too loud, too much. But that dress wasn't for them. It was for me. It was a turning point stitched in satin. And because of that moment, I stand here now. Not quiet, not small, but full." I looked around the room and continued. You don't need to be understood to be worthy. You don't need to be agreed with to be true. What you need, what you deserve, is to take up space in your own life. I paused. So if anyone ever tries to dim you, remember this. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. You are a chapter that changes the entire book. They stood. All of them. Applause shook the beams. And in that moment, I didn't feel like the girl who had something to prove. I felt like the woman who already had. Later, Arabella and I lay in the old hayloft, staring up at stars through a skylight we'd installed together. She whispered, "We made something beautiful, didn't we?" I whispered back, "We became something beautiful." The next morning, a girl named Elsie showed up early, the same 12-year-old who had written to me the year before. Now 13, holding her own worn journal. She sat beside me on the porch swing and said, "I finished it, my story. Can I read it to you?" I turned, eyes stinging. I'd be honored. And as she read, her voice steady and wide with wonder, I thought, this is how the story lives on. Not in one dress, not in one sister, but in every woman who dares to wear herself fully. No apologies. Only truth. Only light. Only the next word. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.